Hey, I hope you're doing well. Thanks for clicking on the video. Today in Loving Your Neighbor, Being Kind on Social Media, we're talking about something that affects us all, whether we realize it or not. And I think this thing is on the rise in a big way thanks to the coronavirus's Better at Home initiative. And what is it? FOMO, the fear of missing out. FOMO is this. As you look on social media at all the things your friends, family, and society are participating in and doing, you begin to fear not being a part of what's going on. Still not willing to admit this affects you? Okay, here's a little test. Have you ever been looking through your feed on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, or TikTok and see that your friends were out doing something? Maybe they were out to eat or catching a movie or just hanging out, but they were doing those things without you? How did that make you feel? Yep, that's FOMO. And during this time of additional isolation, the fear of missing out or not being connected to others is on the rise. But what does God have to say about all of this? If you're feeling disconnected, like you're missing out, or if you just feel tired and worn out, he specifically tells us in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Jesus doesn't want us to carry the burdens that we've created for ourselves. And constantly having to be a part of everything, what's going on online and in our friend circles, is definitely a burden. That's why it's important to lift and admit every negative emotion or thought that we have to the Lord. How might your FOMO interfere with loving your neighbor? Well, you may neglect them and their needs due to your desire to keep up with what's going on. And now more than ever, we need to be looking to the needs of our neighbors. So let's break down this Bible verse in more detail. The first part of verse 28 gives us something very important. There we reread, "Come to me all who are weary and burdened." Jesus wants us to come to Him and Him alone. In our times of exhaustion, stress, and fear, where do we turn? If you're anything like me, your response isn't immediately going to God in prayer or study. For me, I like greasy food, I like video games, and I like Netflix. Your list might be a little bit different, but the idea is still the same. We're not going to Jesus alone. The big problem is when we try to self-medicate and we go in the wrong direction. God wants us to long after Him. We see this all throughout the Bible. In 1 Chronicles 16:11 we read, "Look to the Lord in His strength, seek His face always." Matthew 6:33 says, "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." Acts 17:27 says, "God did this so they would seek Him and perhaps reach out for Him and find Him, though He's not far from any one of us." James 4:8 says, "Come near to God, and He will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded." And the list of passages encouraging us to seek God goes on and on. The next part of Matthew 11 and verse 28 gives us the reason why. Why should we seek Jesus and Him alone? Look at the second part of verse 28. There we read, "And I will give you rest." Only Jesus is capable of giving us true rest. We weren't meant to carry the weight of the world. One of the verses that I think gets misquoted or mistaught the most is 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13, which says, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." This verse gets thrown around as if there's not a temptation that I cannot handle on my own. But look more carefully at that verse. He will provide a way of escape. We often go into temptations or trials thinking about how we can handle it, not thinking about what God is doing in the situation. And we also tend to linger in the situation until we no longer can escape because the door that God was holding open for us has closed. Humans are weak, and we're incapable of handling the weight of the world, the stress of a full schedule, and the rapid pace of trying to keep up with everyone. Unless Christ has explicitly called you to a busy life for His kingdom specifically, you need to reprioritize, kick things off your schedule, and take a break. If you need a break, God commands you to take a break. When I try to teach my kids how to do something, the way I found the most success is by having them watch me do the thing first, and then I talk through why and how I'm doing it. This is exactly what God is doing when He rests on the seventh day of creation and institutes the Sabbath. And while we're no longer under the Jewish law, you better believe that having His creation find peace and rest is still one of God's top priorities. We must fight against the cultural norm that says in order to be successful or valuable, that you have to be busy. Being busy shouldn't be a badge of honor. And to be honest, just saying those words stung a little bit, because I need to hear this just as badly, and if not more, than most of you. Jesus goes on in Matthew 11 and verse 29 and says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Part of finding rest is connecting ourselves to Jesus and being a part of the work that He is doing. But to understand this verse, we have to answer a question. What is a yoke? Well, a yoke is an object that you would use to link two beasts of burden, like cows or oxen, together at the shoulders so they could jointly pull the weight of a wagon or a plow. Jesus says we need to link to Him so that He can start helping us pull our loads. Jesus doesn't condemn us when we're not perfect, when we stumble, and when we feel like we can't go on, because when we're connected to Him, He's the one doing the work. That's why if you feel called to do something, do it for Jesus. Paul writes about this in Philippians 4:13 and says, "I can do all things through Him who gives me strength." Here in this passage and in the greater part of the letter of Philippians, Paul explains that he can do and does do whatever he does for and through Jesus. Paul certainly placed Jesus' yoke on his neck. So, in closing, let's take a look at the last verse from this passage, Matthew 11 and verse 30. There, we continue reading and it says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." When we draw near to Jesus and take His yoke upon us, the work is light and it's easy. But why? It's because Jesus is doing all of the heavy lifting. He's the one who has blazed the path. He's the one who saved us from our sin, and He's the one who's given us an example to follow. When we walk next to Jesus, the struggle and difficulties do not go away. But Jesus is there to help pull us through it. So what does FOMO and taking Jesus' yoke upon ourselves have to do with being a good neighbor? As mentioned earlier, you may neglect your neighbors and their needs due to your desire to keep up with what's going on. Setting an example of busyness and the need to keep up with others not only exhausts you, but it sets an impossible standard for others. When you finally slow down and attach yourself to Jesus, you take on the mind of Jesus that's able to be bothered by a woman who wants to be healed, even though He's already on His way to heal another person. When you attach yourself to Jesus, you're able to spend time with the people around you instead of longing to spend time with the people who aren't around you. And when you attach yourself to Jesus, you're able to breathe hope and love into others in a way that you've never been able to before. Well, that's it for today's video on loving your neighbor, being kind on social media. Remember, Jesus' yoke is easy and His burden is light. Know that I'm praying for you and your family, and know that I hope you have an awesome day.